Uh, I don't even know how to begin this, except for to say I don't know how to begin this, but I'm beginning it, so it's beginning. Uh, did you want to banter a little, or
That
you
sounds
said
like
that
something a
everything?
dawdler would say.
Yeah, something is so rote now for us. Um, uh,
Yeah, it's fine. We'll just do plow through it.
I know you were having your own little ice age moment not too long ago. I don't know. I am. I had something that I was going to say about my middle name thing, but I don't remember it anymore.
Oh,
Oh,
that's
it's too
disappointing.
bad. It is too bad. It's too bad. So I guess I'm just Ryan. I'm just Ryan McKenna.
I'm Harland, Nashville every night, Grant.
Well, and we are the Dawdlers, who are very patterned at this point in our introductions.
Because this is the Dawdler's Philosophy Podcast.
All right. Well, Ryan,
What are
what?
we
What are
talking
we going to talk
about
about today?
tonight?
uh, okay. So we're here. I feel like we have been doing a lot of little shorts, and we haven't done some big uns in a while. We did the last like long one wasn't even like our normal Dawdlers one. Is that right? Or am I wrong about all that? No, no. It
The
was
last long one was regular.
yeah, it
That
was
was
regular.
Hofstetter.
Regular. All right, yeah, okay, never mind. So this time we're going to talk about something that I don't know if people will know what I'm talking about right off the bat, but then hopefully after a while, after this episode, they'll have a better sense. But we're talking about the Pleistocene.
The what the Gesundheit? What?
Yeah, the
We don't know what the hell
Pleistocene.
you're talking about.
You know, the Pleistocene.
It
Oh,
sounds like some kind of era or eon or something.
well, you would be close. The Pleistocene is a period of time that geologists talk about or have sectioned off to cover, certain events, geological events that have occurred. And my interest always in it has been, the ecosystems of the Pleistocene. And I guess my main motivation to bring it onto the podcast here is that it's something that a lot of relatively popular psychologists like Steven Pinker or whatever like to mention kind of briefly while they then go into all the experimental psychology stuff that they want to talk about. Because the Pleistocene is sort of the one real nod to geology that people who care about humans and interesting human things, it's kind of like the one nod they do. Okay. So psychologists or so when we want to talk about, well, especially when you think about evolution and psychology, or as some people call it evolutionary psychology, but I don't even know what the state of that situation is anymore. People like to say, well, back in the Pleistocene, we blah blah blah, and this is why we today are blah blah blah, or something like that. And in addition, I guess if you really wanted to say what the hell is the Pleistocene, you could just say, well, it's the Ice Age. It's the caveman days, for lack of lack of all of any better words. But there's a lot more better words, so we can use them, like the Pleistocene. Yeah. So we're talking.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, yeah. The caveman days and the ice age, and so is there like woolly mammoths walking around and
Yeah. Yeah.
saber-toothed
Woolies.
tigers out there and
Yeah. Exactly. We're running scared, like it's just like it is in Hollywood. But coming from my angle, as you can imagine already, that was like a long time ago for somebody like me who's really into this stuff. You know what I mean? So it's harder because of the curse of knowledge, or whatever you want to call it, for me to remember, oh yeah, people need to know Ice Age. They need to know caveman.
yeah, well, I can help you with the curse of knowledge about this because I don't suffer from that.
No, you don't.
I don't know if this would be the right time, but a couple of questions that I would have in general, based on what you've said so far, would just be throw some years ago at us.
I will.
And then you mentioned that these time periods are marked off by geologic events. I don't know if you plan to talk about which event started and ended the Pleistocene, or is the Ice Age the answer to that, or?
Yeah, for the most part, and caveman.
Okay.
Those are two events, I guess you could say. Um, but I guess the idea is you wanted to know years ago, kind of thing. So it's these things always come with plus and minus, and I always see very different dates depending on whatever you're encountering. Let's just say we're talking about 2 million years ago till, oh, I don't know, 18,000 years ago. And that's the general duration of the Pleistocene.
That's not very long ago.
Nice.
And it sounds
Good
like
answer.
a really huge chunk. 2 million years ago to 18,000?
That's correct, sir.
This sounds like we're on the fingernail or whatever now then.
Yeah, for sure.
Because 2 million to 18,000 is a big difference.
It is a big difference. A lot happens in that amount of time. But really what it is, you could potentially say that the Pleistocene is sort of the onset of a new ice age. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly say, when we talk about 2 million years ago and all that kind of stuff, we're talking about geological time. And so, for instance, we often like to say that the Earth is 4.5 or 4.6 billion years old and all that. And this is something that we arrive at using physics. And I suppose for many people it's kind of boring, but it's like, physics, statistics, and a lot of math to try and understand, how old the Earth is based on our understanding of things like isotopes and radioactive decay. And now that I am at this point, I'm like, probably shouldn't mention those things because, damn, what a rabbit hole that could be. But essentially, we arrive at this estimate through those basic factors and the things that we've learned about radioactive decay. And now there are other ways to date things that people have been clever enough to come up with. But I think this is the primary one. And oddly enough, we kind of use meteorites instead of, we tend to, trust meteorites more than we do the oldest rocks and things like that we can find. Because meteorites, well, Earth itself is always recycling rocks. And many rocks may not be available to us. And so meteorites which fall from the solar system floating out there onto the planet can, essentially represent kind of untouched, if you will, formations of material that essentially go back to this, the formation of the solar system. I won't get into those details because that you could probably debate as well, but there is an argument using meteorites instead of rocks on Earth. And there's many, many, many attempts to date things, like the age of the Earth, for instance, using meteorites. But you can also use rocks, because not all rocks are, we're not trying to get ages that old all the time. And so you can use lots of different other kinds of isotopes. And isotopes are essentially the kind of, it's like an atom, if you will, that has an additional number of neutrons rather than the same number of neutrons as the number of protons in the nucleus of an atom. And so that's the difference. And so usually it's that there's more neutrons. And so, it comes down to that and other things. So there's stable and unstable isotopes. And some of those unstable isotopes decay spontaneously, more or less. But we can still kind of, get an estimate of what the rate of decay is. So anyway, moving on from that, we use that today to get a much finer, more satisfactory way of getting an age on things. But in general, we've always used bigger ways of talking about things just to kind of slot things and categorize and put things in bins and all that. And it's a hierarchical structure that we've created. And so the largest structure outside of just simply the age of the Earth would be eons. And then following that, we've got eras, and then periods, and then epochs, and then I guess you could say stages or ages, but I think stages is probably better because ages is used informally and formally in lots of different ways. But these other ones are kind of more formal. And you can have subs in between, sub periods or sub whatever, even though some of these, well, anyway. So where are we in all this with respect to the Pleistocene, you ask?
Where are we?
We are in the we're talking about, we're not in it now, but we're talking about the Pleistocene epoch in the Quaternary period of the Cenozoic era in the Phanerozoic eon.
That's impressive.
Isn't it? Cenozoic meaning new life and Phanerozoic meaning visible life. So Phanerozoic has a lot to do with fossils. So I was saying earlier that they're kind of like entering into a new ice age, or that's kind of the beginnings of the Pleistocene. Why I say that is because there have been other ice ages, which we could also say maybe more properly as ice houses. So we have like a greenhouse and ice house periods, So there have been other ice house phases on Earth in the past, most notably in this cryogenian period. If you notice, I said period, so you get the Quaternary period. There's a period called the cryogenian, which was 720 to 625 million years ago. And some people who are familiar with a little bit of pop culture geology stuff, the exciting bits, might have heard the term snowball Earth. And so this is just one of the times where we had an ice house. But this one was significant in that some geologists think that the entire planet was covered in ice, or, at the surface. And that was also at the same time as another time there was a supercontinent, not just Pangea, that was a different supercontinent, but this one was called Rodinia. And following this cryogenian period, we kind of, in the fossil record, it looks like you start to see the advent of multicellular organisms like sponges and things like that. So that's an interesting sequence anyway. But one thing I want to say quickly, though, is that when we talk about ice ages or ice houses, we're talking about ice at the poles, more or less, covering the poles. So there can be ice in places, but if it's not covering the poles, I guess that's the big one. I'm sure someone would be like, no, or whatever. The other thing is I want to say is that, like, this stuff a lot, and the next, so this is part one of the Pleistocene. If you're bored out of your skull now, no. But part two,
Buckle up, because this is a multi-part long episode.
I made plans. I have goals. But the climate science isn't like at all like human origins or anything like that, like paleoanthropology. But it definitely has like enough change going on because it's such an active field and things are changing, and global warming and climate change and all that. That it's hard to keep up necessarily, and so I have my schooling, and I had some serious climate oriented geologists trained me, but it is what it is. So this is as much a data dump, but I try my best. I think a lot of the stuff that we talk about today is it's not like set in stone, but it's not
the nice geology pun there.
I didn't even know I was doing it. All right. So
is there enough ice on the poles today that we count as being in an ice house?
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. I think we're still very much in an ice age. I don't think that's changed. Part of that is because of the setup hasn't changed, which we are going to talk about now. Yes. What a fucking segue. So there's kind of two chunks that I want to talk about, and going to talk about like plate tectonics a little bit, and then those effects, and then also I guess the ice sheets themselves and kind of how they form and all the interacting things that happen there. So let us begin.
Let us.
Yeah. Lettuce and tomato. I guess, with plate tectonics, you've got the plates on the planet are moving, and so the continents, the continental land masses are moving around. Essentially, you can think of since Pangea, 250 million years ago, things have been spreading apart. And you have got, a larger and larger Atlantic Ocean basin, and I guess to some extent a smaller and smaller Pacific one. And the movement of these plates has had an effect on the distribution of, or the circulation, if you will, throughout the atmosphere and the ocean. And so the big one, I guess you could say, is the distribution of energy, because sun comes and hits the planet more or less in the belly, right at the equator more. And then from there, it, any warmth gets distributed. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it is itself like a major, it's a major of in utmost importance without question. But there's some other things that are also really important when it comes to climate and the climate that we have today and all that kind of business. But you got the continents moving around, and what ends up happening is you kind of have what I'm introducing something I guess called the gateway hypothesis, and I talked about it in the Summer at Aphelion episode, the climate change one. But the idea is that, some continents, what we would call continents today, have split apart from each other, and others are, coming or forming and connecting and all that kind of stuff. They're forming connections between each other, bridges, if you will, like Panama. And so when you have that happening, you have the alterations in how ocean, temperature and density and, salinity and all that gets moved around in the ocean. But also, as you have like India ramming into Asia, you have, quite a bit of uplift in the Andes as well. And so when you're lifting the land masses higher and higher, it does alter what the atmosphere can do as well. And so it changes circulation patterns with respect to, where they were before to where they are going to go now, because there's stuff in the way or what have you, barriers and corridors. But also there's like, this also changes like how there's like the, how with circulation you can have like upwelling areas. And a lot of that also has to do with the way that the continents and the oceans interact with respect to if you're really heating up the land and the warmth right at the surface of the the land is getting hot because it's absorbing the sun, and then when it absorbs it, it radiates it off, and you get the kind of heat waves if you're ever driving, not in Minnesota or North Dakota these days, but somewhere, and you see the little waves coming off the road. You got that heat coming off. That's the absorbed energy that's being radiated. And so that means that the air right there above the land is getting, above the ground surface, is getting warmer. And because it's warmer, has more energy, it expands due to buoyancy, it rises up, and then the colder air is going to sink and come in and, sort of fill that space, and you get the convection. And so you also can get winds going, say, off a continent onto the ocean. And what that will have an effect of is pushing the surface water. And so as it pushes the water, just like wind pushes leaves on a tree or whatever, water below will come up. And so you'll have upwelling. And so you can have these various kinds of effects from the interaction between the land and the air and the ocean and all that kind of stuff. But then imagine that at the poles, especially, say, with respect to something like Greenland or major ice sheets over North America and, of course, Antarctica, you can get this pushing of the water away from the ocean, from the landmass. And if there's ice, it's going to be potentially quite cold. Any water that is being pushed away might be the warm surface water that gets hit by any sunlight. And it gets colder and colder and colder, and sea ice can form. And when you do that, when you form that sea ice, the densest part of, water is at its densest just before it freezes. I think it's 39 degrees Celsius, or something like, I think Fahrenheit or whatever. And 32 is when it freezes, and then I think it's 38 or 39. Now, for some reason, I'm not remembering. But it's just before it, and it's really dense. And what happens when ice forms, it kicks out all the salt and all the other stuff. So it's just like, no, I want to be pure, more or less. And when it does that, of course, it's a thing of ice that forms on the surface, and all that cold, dense, salty water drops down. And what ends up happening is it just starts to create a conveyor, if you will, throughout the planet. And what the poles during, especially these ice ages, are looked upon as a sort of like climate engines that sort of drive the circulation of the ocean. And then, of course, it has all these other interactions with the land and the atmosphere, but that it's a kind of a good origin point for, pushing, like, where do you begin if you're going to talk about when and where a circulation in the planet starts, that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
Anyway, I just want to set that up a little bit. And this, you're distributing energy and all that kind of stuff. Any wonderful or bored questions that you have?
Unfortunately not.
Good. That means it's working or something. Okay, so this is the data dump part, I guess, of it all.
Yep.
Which is, you got to do it sometimes, damn it. So now I then just want to say, okay, so with all that, you got to get to that point, though. And I've talked about, gateway, the changing of the continents, and also sort of how, the poles can operate as sort of helping to generate, and push circulation around in different ways. I mean, it was thought, and I don't know where this stands to this day, but some people think that there was very little that, like, for instance, during the time of the dinosaurs, that the oceans were really well mixed, that there wasn't this stratification of temperature and density and all that kind of stuff, like that it was just kind of one big old homogeneous sort of mass. I don't know if that is correct or not, but it, as in contrast to what we have today, where we have quite a bit of circulation in the oceans. So kind of want to talk really briefly about it's a very important paper, and to primarily people who in the earth sciences, but it's this paper by James Zakos and colleagues, and there's about 4 other authors, and it was put out in 2001, and it's called Trends, Rhythms, and Aberrations in Global Climate, 65 million years ago to the present. And published in Science, which is one of the big ones. Science and Nature, the two big science journals. That, if you get one published in there, you've hit the big time and all that kind of stuff. You're in the majors. But here, what they did was, and this is sort of something that I kind of myself tangentially grace or scrape along or whatever. I don't know fucking what I'm trying to say, but they took all these sediment cores and they gathered stable isotope measurements from the sediment cores, because there's these little organisms called foraminifera or foraminiferans, and they incorporate oxygen and carbon in their little shells. I think they're called tests. They may not be actually called tests. It's been a while since I've thought about these things, but they take in the isotopes more or less from the sea that they're living in, and in doing so, isotopes like an oxygen 18 is an isotope. The standard one, where there's the same number of protons and neutrons, is oxygen 16, but 18, you can imagine, then has a few more neutrons in it, a couple more, and it's heavier. So just in general, just the physics of the problem is that it's more work to take up oxygen 18 than it is to take in oxygen 16. So they can look at the ratios of oxygen 16 to 18 and get a sense for where they are based on how much work it was and how much was available to do the work at the time that the organism was forming its shell or whatever. And so from here, you kind of get a bit kind of a proxy for temperature changes. And so these guys took all these cores, sediment cores from the ocean, seafloor, and just created a composite of them. And then out of that composite of all these measurements they got over time, they were able to create this big old curve that basically shows you like how temperature has changed more or less over the past 65 million years. And that was a big deal at the time. That was a big data deal. And I think that curve is still used in people's papers. They still like plot it up against other stuff, because it was just, decades perhaps worth of data collection that had been going on, and they found, whatever it was. I don't know how they came up with the plan to do it. I don't know their story, but they did it, and so it's a big deal. But what's nice about it is that it allows them to then say, okay, at this point in time, these are the things that in other areas of the world we say are happening from other data or whatever. So they were able to kind of line everything up. And so, you have, with this gateway hypothesis, you have things like the connection between Australia and Antarctica, because they formed Gondwana, South America, Australia, Antarctica. They call it, there's like you could say it was like a Gondwana, and then Laurentia came together and they formed Pangaea, but they separate when they finally do separate into those two halves, one in the north, one in the south. Then they've got, we've got these subparts that we now call Australia or Antarctica and South America. So at some point, eventually Australia breaks off from its connection with what today is Antarctica. And that was around like 34 million years ago. And then around like 30 million years ago, you got the breaking up of South America from Antarctica, and that forms the Drake Passage. And now the Arctic is isolated, and it has this sort of circumpolar circulation pattern going on around it, which allows it to start to make things like the glaciers somewhat partial or ephemeral or even full scale and permanent. And then you start to then also, because you have all this tectonic movement, you've got the Tibetan Plateau forming because India is the Asian subcontinent's moving in, and that's causing changes to the atmosphere. Finally, by around like 4 million or so years ago, you got this Central American Seaway, which we would say is where Panama is now, forms, and that kind of closes things off. And so you're changing circulation patterns, and that's sort of this one thing I wanted to make sure that these are the things that kind of happen leading up to the final, like, okay, now you can have an ice age. It's not the only reason for an ice age, but it's like all this setup. So when you said, well, can we gonna be out of an ice age now or not? And I'm thinking, well, that's going to be one thing having all these continents arranged the way they are, they'll have to move. Things will have to break up maybe a little bit to finally get out of it, in terms of what we would define it as, being, because even if we just all went away and carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases in the atmosphere got sucked up by the rocks and got into long-term storage or something like that, and there's no humans or whatever, things would probably go back to this pattern that where we go from glacial to interglacial, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah. What else do you want to talk about, Harland? Anything else? You're like, anything else? Not this.
Yeah, I'm wondering what this how does this weigh on the Michael Cohen testimony?
Current events.
No. Yeah, there's. I mean, just to continue with the geological puns, just keep laying groundwork.
Yes. Excellent. So those are sort of the timing of the changes in the plate tectonics and all that kind of stuff. Thanks, James Zakos. So now I'm going to move on to the ice sheets, because now we can form some ice sheets. Well, not that Antarctica may not have already had some, millions of years prior. But the big kind of change is where you start to develop ice sheets in the north. And a lot of that probably also has to do with the changes in the positions of the land, because if you ever looked at a globe, you would see that the actual northernmost area is just water. It's an ocean, the Arctic Ocean. And so there's lots of land around it. So in a way, maybe that also has a role to play with the delay in, but I don't know, I'm just speculating here, but maybe that has something to do with the delay in creating an ice age, and whatnot, like there was able to be done with the Antarctica in the South Pole region. So essentially, the idea, though, is that there's a couple different factors with respect to ice sheets forming on land. And one of those does have to do with the amount of light you're going to get. So one of the things about being in the poles is that part of the year you're getting a ton of light, and part of the year you're getting absolutely none. But also, the temperature can be a lot cooler than, say, at the equator. And also, because of those extremes in your seasons, you can have a lot more extremes, say, to an extent. You can be more sensitive, I think, to temperature change, to changes that could have effect on temperature and things like that. So one of the big ones, and this one's actually bigger than the continent, or than the configuration of the continents and all the circulation, but and I mentioned this, so we won't go over it in great detail, but the orbital cycles of the planet, the Earth, it does at least three things that it looks like have an effect on the amount of sun that does come and hit the planet, and how much it absorbs and whatnot. So there's the one called the precession, which is, you can think of it like a top when you spin a toy little, top, and it's spinning and spinning. Eventually, it's not going to spin fast forever. It's going to slow down. And as it slows down, you see kind of how the axis of the top kind of takes a much wider angle from maybe what it was like when you first started to spin it. But it also kind of has this sort of wobble to it. And that's this idea of precession. Some precession can go between a more intense kind of, or a more wider wobble, and a more kind of less wide wobble, if you will. Then there's another one called obliquity, which is just where the axis of the planet, is tilted. If it has there is a plane of its orbit around the sun, then the angle of the axis of the planet with respect to the orbit itself, the plane of the orbit, can change, and so that's obliquity. And then eccentricity is just sort of the shape of the orbit around the sun. So it can be kind of more egg-shaped, like oval, and more circular, and it kind of changes. And so the precession changes over like 23,000 years. It goes back and forth between its, boundary, if you will, between one stage and the next. And then Obliquity changes in its axis tilt every 41,000 years. And eccentricity, there's one that's about 100,000 years, and there's one that's like 413 or something like that. The 100,000 year one's kind of more important. Um, and so with that, you can alter how much sun comes into the planet, and um, the way that the seasons work with respect to having all of these orbital cycles working together. They can create a environment where your summers might be a little bit cooler than normal, say, and so any ice that does form will stick around. Any kind of snow that falls, it'll stay. There's also a little bit of a feedback, kind of in a local way, between snow and the atmosphere and the sun, is that the snow has got something called an albedo. All things have an albedo, I guess you could say. Even pitch black things have an albedo, and that albedo is 0. But snow is going to be closer to 1, and so that's how much it reflects the light. And when you reflect a lot of light, you're not absorbing it. And so in not absorbing it, you're not then going to radiate much heat, which then won't come around to melting the snow and stuff like that. So if you have snow falling in some thickets or whatever with lots of sticky branches and things like that, the branches themselves will absorb whatever sunlight is coming in. And if not enough snow fell, they can have an effect on melting the snow around them, just by radiating their own heat from the stuff they absorb from the sun. So that's the kind of thing that starts to build these ice sheets, as where you just have cooler and cooler and cooler summers. And that has a lot to do with how sunlight is hitting the planet, with respect to how it's tilted away from, with the obliquity, tilted away from the sun even more, or the actual shape is not giving enough sunlight at certain times of the year. And maybe the wobble has something to do with it too. These are the things that kind of come together. Plus you got the continents, and so you can start to build up ice sheets, and they have, again, these kind of local and global effects. But eventually, when you start to build a huge ice sheet, it can have effects on the atmosphere in a major way, where if you had a huge thing of ice like Antarctica, it's going to create this huge high pressure zone, which will have effects on all the other pressure zones throughout the atmosphere. Because the high pressure is just, the idea is that you've got heavy air coming down on you, so it's heavy, it's hot, and it's just like high pressure. Low pressure is, it's like coming off. It's so low pressure would be like the Amazon, and it's the trees are releasing and respiring, and everything's warm, and everything's just kind of rising up and just expanding, and that's low pressure. And you get a lot of storms and things because you're bringing up a lot of moisture into the atmosphere, which then cools from its more gaseous state to a more liquid state, and it falls as rain and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of that's sort of the main thing about the ice sheets in terms of their development and kind of the overall effects that they can have. And so these are things that are happening throughout the Pleistocene. And what happens is that they really get to going around, say, 2 million to 1.8 million or whatever years ago. And they start moving in these cycles, though, which are kind of weird and hard to explain. Some people think it has a lot to do, or for a while, they thought it had a lot to do with the orbital cycles. But one of the things about climate science is they keep coming up with hypotheses, which are great and creative and interesting. But a lot of them they just get knocked down. They're like, no, that's not working. That doesn't explain it. That, like that kind of thing happens quite a bit in science in general, but definitely in climate science. It's definitely been going on for, quite a while now, for decades. But it goes through these cycles, and the cycles in the beginning of this stage, well, the vast majority of it really, till about maybe 900,000 years ago or 1 million years ago. So from about 2 million to about 1 million, or to a little bit longer, it goes through this cycle that correlates really well with obliquity, which is the 41,000 year cycle. And then it changes, which is, for a long time, and I don't know exactly where it's at right now, but I know it's been quite a bit of a mystery. There's two mysteries. One is why go from glacier to interglacier, period where you lose all the ice in the north for the most part, and then why this transition, this mid-Pleistocene transition as it's known, where you go from this obliquity dominated cycle of interglacial to glacial to this eccentricity dominated cycle of ice sheet growth, development, and decay, going from 41,000 year cycle to an 100,000 year cycle. That's interesting in and of itself, just because it's interesting. But I have a few things that I would talk about with respect to that, but I don't want to. I can talk about them in a second. If you have anything you'd like to, you can just say this can be your okay. You've got like 45 okays today.
Yeah, okay. I want to talk about the next, what you were going to, yeah.
Okay, so the next thing then is about these mysteries. Talking about, I have a better handle, and I think everybody has a better handle on the mid-Pleistocene transition. One of the cool things about the glaciers is that when they first formed, they formed in a world where and I'm kind of like begging the question here a little bit and giving you the answer more or less, but they formed in a world that isn't preserved anymore, because the glaciers have since like eroded everything off of Canada practically. If there were soils and even, I guess you could even say, soft sedimentary rocks, the glaciers have completely gotten rid of them. And one of the ideas that has been proposed, and I don't remember the person who proposed it, but the idea is that you go in this 41,000 year cycle. The problem is that when the glaciers would form, they'd form on soils. And in doing so, forming on these soils, there would be an exchange of moisture and temperatures and whatnot with the base of the actual glaciers. The ice sheets, really. They're continental ice sheets. And in doing so, the glaciers, as they built up, would actually just spread out. They would just kind of, go, far and wide really quickly comparatively, because they'd be riding on a kind of like going down a water slide or whatever. They just move much quicker. And so this is the idea that eventually, though, this 41,000 year cycle of glacial, interglacial intervals happen enough that they finally, by, a million years ago or 900,000 or whatever, had just eroded pretty much everything clean off that was to be eroded, like a soil that was soft and pushable and all that kind of stuff. And once that happened, they just had, bare rock, to stick to. And it's cold, the rock's cold. It doesn't, especially if you think of a granite, it's not absorbing a lot of water at all. It's just this hard thing. And, the ice is just going to not go anywhere. And it'll build up, and you'll end up getting these massive kind of domes. I'm sure that's probably what's going on with Antarctica, and that's why it's so high in elevation. That like the South Pole is like very high. I don't know what the height is, but it's high. And anyway, the idea is that once that happens, it takes more than just an obliquity cycle to melt the glaciers, because they're not going anywhere and they're building up really thick. And so the idea is that you have this transition from like a much more rapid pace to this, glacial, interglacial period to this other one. But that also means it's probably going to have an impact on, climate and ecosystems and all kinds of things when the ice just doesn't go away that easy. But what's weird about these cycles, especially with the 100,000 year eccentricity dominated cycle, is that they form over a really long time. It's just like this like slow grow up to the point, and then they hit this like maximum, and then it's like they just go. They're like all the water goes away, and you get events like around where we are here, or I am, where you get the Missoula floods, and there's apparently many Missoula floods that had occurred, where the ice is melting and it just creates these huge floods, and the ice just melts much faster than it takes to form. The question is, well, then why does it melt at all, And some would say it has to do with you're coming around that point in the orbital cycles where everything's just right to melt it, or it's building up the melting, and once you get water mixed in, it just becomes a cascade. It's sort of a positive feedback loop. It just accelerates more change. There is a report that had come out maybe a few years ago, and here I am, this fucking don't even have that one. I wanted to get it too. I was like, oh, I don't forget to get it, but there's so much to talk about. But anyway, that one, yeah, I'm an idiot. But that one was saying that there's a buildup potentially. It looks like there's some evidence that there's a lot of greenhouse gases that are entered into the atmosphere from quite a bit of kind of concentrated mid-ocean ridge eruptions in these spreading zones where, in the ocean, like the mid oceans, there's the, kind of areas that are called spreading zones or whatever. They're partly related to what's moving the continents around. But anyway, so you have that idea that there's some increased volcanic activity releasing a lot of greenhouse gases sort of into the atmosphere. So there's some apparent evidence for that. I don't know what the duration of time over which these eruptions occur. That's just enough to get the thing to push it over, and then you get this rapid melting phase. But as far as I can tell, it's not set in stone. Again, it's not set in stone at this point, anyway. But there's some ice sheet mysteries. One thing I did want to mention really quick was that my brother has always made fun of me in a loving way, not like, oh, you're an idiot, but like he always calls the Pleistocene the Plindices or whatever, because I think it's just one of those words that you're like, I'm not going to memorize that. And then when you try and talk about it later, you're like, I don't know what that word was, but sort of like this, Anyway.
Am I supposed to have got that joke in any way?
No, not at all. It's just a loving brother.
It's just a nonsense word?
Yeah, Plindices.
Or whatever. Yeah, okay.
No meaning, just random brain stuff.
I like how much you're nerding out on this one.
You should have seen me doing the research. Jesus. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like well-guided research. You're like, I know exactly where to go to get this information. I don't think about it every single day, so I know I need to go and look it up. But it was a joy. It's not over yet. Everyone's like, no, why did I stay this long? Well, you stayed this long to talk about the big cats.
Yes. The stars are coming out now.
That's right. Yeah, so that's sort of the physical environment, and that's sort of the stuff that was happening on Earth with respect to, just physical chemical processes that are, the varying scales. Now, when you say the Pleistocene, and you're referring to some, evolutionary psychology thing that you learned, and you're like, yeah, they mentioned the Pleistocene. This is what we mean. Like, a lot of this shit's happening, and it's quite impactful, because one of the things that happens as well is once you get to that 100,000 year stage, for sure, you start to ice is super fucking heavy. I mean, it's like where you live right now you would have been under a mile of ice for sure. Like it would have just been at the glacial maximum 20,000 years ago. And that's a heavy
would have
amount.
been. And it feels like I am now.
That's true. That's true. That is so goddamn true. The truth. Anyway, but you can imagine how much weight that would be on Barak. I got to get a fucking little editing sample snippet of Gimli saying that. Anyway.
No sign of our quarry, but what Barak can tell.
It all makes sense later. But it's pounding, the rocks into dust, and so as it like grinds over, and if you look at some rocks, if you go to especially like when, parts of the world that I lived in the past, like Maine, you can see the kind of these like grooves in the granite. They're literally just the rocks that are jammed into the ice, and the ice is moving, and it's just like dragging across, rock against rock, and just the ice is as well as having an effect and creating lots of really, really, really fine dust that they call lurse. And when you throw that in the atmosphere, and sure, it gets deposited elsewhere, but it still makes the atmosphere really dusty. And kind of in the same way that the Sahara, like the Sahara has these huge dust storms that'll go up into the atmosphere, and then just west of the Sahara in Africa, it'll drop all that sediment into the surface of the Atlantic. And because there's a ton of like other things besides just silicon, it's like iron and manganese and all that kind of stuff falling into the surface of the ocean. You'll get these huge algal plumes. So it's the same kind of idea, but it's coming from this grinding from the ice sheets. But also the temperature of the ocean at the surface of the ocean is cooler, and you're not having the same kind of effects where, like here in the Pacific Northwest, or if you live in Ireland or the British Isles, you're getting all this moisture coming off the ocean from the atmospheric circulation patterns, picking up all the moisture and the warmth in that, in that transaction, and dumping it onto the land. And so that's why these areas are very green, and some of them are considered temperate rainforests and whatnot. But during the ice age, a lot of that moisture and water is just, it's caught up in ice. It's like that's where it's being stored. So you don't have that as well. Other things I could mention is that, though you lose land in the north, especially also in Asia and Europe, but North America had really significant ice sheets that went all the way down past, all the way into like Iowa and shit. You lose ground that way, but you gain it with the water of the sea level being much lower because it's all now in ice comparatively. And then if you look on like bathymetric maps where in my area, you'll see, and I'm sure it's this way in many areas, see these like underwater canyons that would have been, just canyons on land. Like, and these are just like where the Columbia River spills out into the Pacific, just west of that, there's these canyons and stuff. And you can imagine that with the sea level being much further down or, lower, you'll have this exposure of so much more land. So anyway, they dredge up all the time because these land bridges form, like Beringia between Alaska and Siberia, and between, say, the continental Europe and Great Britain, and even into Scandinavia, the area of the North Sea. These are just land at one point because all the water was in the ice, the sea level was much lower. So they dredge up all the time, like so many fossils of mammoths and stuff like that from the sea floor because that was just ground at one point. So there's all of that. And then the other thing to mention is that, weirdly enough, the environment, like say like we're in continental U.S., the ice sheet front was like way down. So it was, it was past the glacier, the Great Lakes, and the area essentially right in front of it, would have, been like a tundra, cold, super cold tundra environment with all the kinds of woolly mammoths and really hairy horses and camels and things like that. But also, what it would have done was sandwich between the glacier front and the tropics, all of this, like all these trees and animals and all that. So the environments could be, in some areas, a lot more squished, So there's a lot of relationships that happened back then, ecological ones, that don't happen now because, well, you're up in Ontario, some plant and some squirrel or whatever, and then the other one's down in Mexico or whatever. So there's like a lot of, stuff going on like that. So there's a lot of interesting discoveries that have happened over time when people look at actual sedimentary deposits from that time period, and it has fossils in it. You're like, hey, these two things, they still live, they're not extinct, and they're totally not associated with each other at all until like you looked at the stratigraphic deposits, and you're like, wait a minute. So anyway, that's cool. But moving in further into the ecosystems, there's essentially, because I don't know how much time we have, and I don't really know if I want to like hammer it over the head too much, since we've both talked about we want you're fine with one example. I'm not fine with one example, but I don't like too many examples. So they're just gonna like, I'm gonna give you two examples of like essentially.
You can start there. We've got lots of time.
Well, and since we're not worried about time, right, anymore.
That's right.
So I've talked about these sort of land bridges between, say, continental Europe and, Great Britain and Scandinavia, and then also between Alaska and Siberia. There was also land bridges between Australia and, islands just north in, what is that region? Why can't I remember what it's called? I want to say the Malay Archipelago. And of course, Malaysia itself was much bigger. And so things were a lot more connected in that way as well. And so, this allowed for migrations to occur at various times throughout the Pleistocene when ice would form on the northern continents and, the sea level would drop. And so there's a lot of, not only do we talk about, this idea that, hey, these squirrel nut zippers were intermingling, but one's in Mexico and one's in Canada now or whatever. You also get different kinds of relationships between, continents as well, kind of intermingling because of the opportunities that are provided by these land masses that are sort of suddenly available to run around in. And so, and the migrations will become important for the next episode when we talk about humans. So migration clearly, though, is a big part of a lot of the changes that occur because you have essentially naturally invasive species interacting with others. And, the biggest one probably was what's called the Great American Interchange between South America and North America when the Panama Isthmus formed, closing off the Central American Seaway, and you end up getting a lot of North American animals moving south, and some, but not a lot, but some South American and mammals in particular, but plants and animals and all that moving north. We tend to think of the interchange, though, in terms of mammals, and I'm not exactly sure why. Because it's not like they don't have pollen or other kinds of organisms to access. It's not like there's not paleobotanical, samples that are available to talk about. But mammals are charismatic, I guess. And some of them are really weird, and so that's also interesting in and of itself. Weird for mammals. I laughed alone on that. It's sad. Play that violin. So one of the things then is we talk a lot about these various changes that occur, and, it kind of becomes quite wild. So when I talk about, say, North America, North America having...
My heater's acting up now.
What was that?
That was the furnace getting pissed off.
Oh, shit. I hope you don't explode and die while I continue to talk about this stuff. Anyway. So the the thing about, North America that I think a lot of people don't realize is that, because probably they don't care, but whenever I mention it at parties, which I don't do very often because you know why?
Because you're not at parties very often.
Well, that's true, but also people don't give a shit. or they get really skeptical. They're like, what? But like, a lot of horse.
Blow our minds.
All right. Horses, camels, puppy dogs. Much of their evolution happened in North America, and up until geologically speaking, recently. Yes.
No way.
Indeed. And so the when we think about camels, we don't think about number one, we don't think about them being anywhere but, for the most part, probably just like the Middle East and probably Northern Africa or whatever. But also, we don't tend to think of that, even though there's the Bactrian two-hump camel in Mongolia and stuff. But I don't know if people think about them as much. I don't know. We'll see. I'll do a survey one day. Do you think about Bactrian camels? No, I don't think about the other ones either. So, but not only do people probably think about camels, they think about Africa and the Middle East and deserts and things like that. They also don't think about camels, for the most part, looking throughout much of their evolutionary history like llamas. Essentially that's what llamas, are. They're not like this different thing. They are just camels. And so it doesn't, I'm sure there's some mammalogists who probably would be like, I question that, but I don't know how many would. Essentially, you can look at them as they're basically, that's what they are. The Wanakos and all the other South American type of camels.
The what?
Camels.
Did you say a word? Wadaco or something?
Guanaco? I think that's what they are. Or guanaco. Maybe some people say guanaco.
I've never heard that word before.
Guacamole. I say guacamole. Yeah, guanacos. They're like wild llamas or camels. Yeah, guanaco. It looks like some kind of a llama, but it's camel, and llamas are camels or whatever. We've stayed too long on this part. But a lot of these organisms, these, horses and camels and whatnot, have made their way into Eurasia and Africa. Think of zebras, and even there's, that's ecus. So, with all the, I think, living horses, donkeys and mules and zebras and all of those are all part of ecus, the genus, like we are Homo or whatever. And it's because they share enough characteristics that people are like, yeah, let's lump them together. And they are able to recreate evolutionary histories using phylogenetics. But also, there's stuff coming into North America. So we have bison, and they're, the vast majority of their evolutionary history takes place in Eurasia. Same with a lot of these big cats. So how else did we get jaguars or, I won't even get into the other ones, but yeah, so there's that. But how else did Eurasia get wolves? So these kinds of interactions and interchanges, as they're also called, have big impacts on the ecosystems. And one of the things they talked about how a lot of, like, the hyenas used to be all over the place, except for the Americas. And one of the reasons that some people think that may be the case is because we had so many kind of, caniform animals in the form of canids, dogs, that there's nothing for them to do here, because we already had, essentially, in convergent evolutionary terms, whatever it is that the hyenas offered, that was already covered here. So there was no way to break in, except in the Pliocene, just prior to the Pleistocene, there was one hyena apparently that broke through, and it was like a sprinting animal. So we didn't
just like literally one guy.
There's this one dude. They're like, hey, there goes Chasmos. Anyway, that's another inside joke that only I get. Mm-hmm. So there's that. So there's a lot of interchanges. But we also had, and this one's always kind of, I don't know why, I've always been enamored by it, lions. We had, there were, in North America, there was fucking lions. Not mountain lions, lions, like just killing things. And they were big. This particular, you know, sublineage or whatever of lion was bigger than any other, and maybe one of the biggest cats to have ever lived. There was one in South America that was a saber-toothed cat that was probably even bigger. But that's the other thing I want to talk about, the size of these animals. They're just huge, some of them. You know, there were beavers the size of black bears and great variety of different types of, I'm going to throw the word out there. You're just going to have to deal because they're not all elephants, but proboscideans. You know, there were a whole bunch. There was mastodons. Of course, you had a couple of different kinds of mammoths. There was gomphothere, you know, like, and so there are all these various kinds of animals that very recently, and this is something that's often said by those who have thought about it, it's all very recent that these things were here and they're not. We won't talk about the extinction until next time, but there was just a ton of organisms. There was also something that we've given the common name to, even though it's extinct, that's been called the giant short-faced bear. And yeah, some of the mythology probably surrounding it is more than it probably did. I don't know. But it was a very large bear whose limb proportions have made people think that it was the kind of bear that could just run really fast, and it was huge and probably absolutely terrifying. And then in addition to all of that, there was they're called mecherodonts or dagger-tooth cats, which there's at least two different kinds. There's a saber-tooth cat, which most famously in North America is Smilodon, that genus. And in the United States, I think the greatest number of fossils that we have, if you go to Rancho La Brea in Los Angeles, the tar pits, you'll see a lot of Smilodon fatalis. So you had the saber-tooth cats, but there was also a lineage that are called the dirk-toothed cats, and that was a lineage called Homotherium. Homotherium serum is in North America, the last glacial maximum. There's just all of these rather remarkable animals. Plus, there was an even larger wolf called the dire wolf. Maybe some people are familiar with dire wolf from like Game of Thrones or whatever. I don't know how much bigger it was than regular timber wolves, but likely if there was an isolation between the different populations or whatever, that, you know, kind of like when there's no wolves, coyotes get a little bit bigger. You wonder if when there was no more dire wolves, timber wolves or whatever got a little bit bigger, you know. So or gray wolves as they're probably better known. But gray wolves certainly exist in Eurasia, and there were no dire wolves in Eurasia as far as the fossil record is concerned. And then there was what is often lovingly called a cheetah-like cat, Myricinonyx. But the problem with the Myricinonyx is that even though its limb proportions look like a cheetah, it still had retractable claws, which cheetahs don't. They have a paw like your dog does. Because they run so fast, there's no point in having retractable claws. You know, they might as well just have claws that just stay out, you know. And but Myricinonyx also lived in all these various environments, so it's kind of hard to say that they were just their whole specialty was hunting fast animals like the pronghorn antelope, which is, I think, the fastest land mammal outside of the cheetah itself. So people would say, well, why are they so fast? You know, and it was introduced the idea that, well, maybe it's because, you know, there was something fast chasing them. But it's hard to say at the moment. But you just had this huge suite of predator guild. And of course, then later the grizzly bears came along as well. You had mountain lions as well as jaguars. Certainly there were coyotes running around too. And I mean, it's insane how many different kinds. You wonder like what the population sizes could have actually been, since there's such a great diversity of lineages. And then of course there's a great diversity, like I've already kind of mentioned, along with your moose and your, white-tailed deer or mule deer. You had, and your pronghorns. You had like smaller pronghorns. There were a couple of different other kinds of deer. There was something called a stag moose that was huge. Then, of course, you had all these horses and camels, huge camels, and then these things called giant ground sloths, which would have been just totally strange looking. I kind of think if you ever saw that movie, The Dark Crystal, I wonder if they ever like planned the look of those good guys in The Dark Crystal that the little puppet elf guy hangs out with. I don't. They're Skeksis. I remember the bad guy's name, Skeksis. I don't remember the good guy's name.
1,000 years ago, the crystal cracked. And here, far from the castle, the race of mystics came to live in a dream of peace. Their ways were the gentle ways of natural wizards. Yet now there are only 10, a dying race, numbly rehearsing the ancient ways in a blur of forgetfulness. But today, the ritual gives no comfort. Today, the wisest of the mystics lies dying. Today, they summon the one who must save them.
But anyway, they kind of look like that. They're just like, just these huge lumbering things that are sloths. They're not.
Well, there's got to be something for all these predators to eat.
I guess. But the size of some of these animals, even though the predators were huge, the size of the prey. Sometimes what happens is that the prey just gets so big that there's kind of, once they reach adulthood, until they get a disease or their senescence takes over or whatever, they're kind of untouchable, unless they trip and break their leg or something, or step in a tar pit and can't get out. So it's amazing to me that so many lineages just took this path, and that, I don't know, if you were walking around North America back then, you'd be like, no thanks. Take me back to the mall, to Barnes and Noble, where it's safe.
It's a hard place to be a caveman.
Yeah. So, that's North America. And interestingly enough, I was talking about this diversity, and I did look up a paper. I didn't actually look it up because I have it. So I didn't really look it up. But and I mentioned it a little bit ago, and I was like, oh, it came out recently. It totally came out like 5 years ago. So, but that's recent enough for this 40-year-old. And it's by Tyler Kartzenel, if I'm saying that name correctly, et al. And there's a shit ton of authors.
Goddamn wolf packs.
Yeah. But they're talking about niche partitioning and the sort of African large mammalian herbivores. And one of the things about Africa is that it's basically somewhat what things were like all over the world back 20,000 years ago and earlier, throughout much of the Cenozoic, which is time well before as well than Pleistocene. And so you have these guys that were looking at the poop of a number of large mammalian herbivores. And I'm trying to remember what the park was. It was at a particular park. And they were also looking at this, taking a survey of the plants. And they kind of did they used the genetics to match things up between what you got in the poop and what you got, elsewhere, out in the wild, out growing off the roots. So when they did that, what they found was that there's these like plant suites that these large mammalian herbivores all kind of specialize in. So it's like, okay, this one eats a lot more grass, like the zebras. They eat more grass and they don't eat a lot of this and they don't eat a lot of that, but they eat a little bit of this. So it's this like special, it's like, if you got a deck of cards and you got a hand and your hand has this particular thing. It's not like anyone else's hand or whatever. It's your hand. And it's kind of like that. You got this set, this hand of cards, each of the lineages essentially does that. And that's how they're able to kind of partition themselves out. And then, of course, also their adaptations reflect this, relationship that they have with plants. So horses need teeth that are going to be able to handle the intense amount of abrasion that happens with the grasses they're eating, because the grasses, when they're, taking stuff up into their xylem and phloem, they take up a lot of silica. So that's like chewing on sand, and that's going to wear your teeth out pretty quickly. And actually, one of the things they notice when they look at people back in the Pleistocene, for instance, they try and figure out, well, what were they eating? One of the ways they can kind of get a sense for what people were eating is if they have like their teeth have like, scratches and abrasions and, nicks in them and stuff like that. That's one indication that they were eating a lot of mollusks and seashells, because they've got a lot of sand and grit, and they try and, deal with that, and they make a pearl or whatever. But that, is one of the things that paleoanthropologists and archaeologists do. So anyway, so there's that kind of thing going on. And I'm guessing to an extent that probably was also happening in the Pleistocene. But what's weird is that what happens when, you're sandwiching between the glacier, the front edge, leading edge of the glacier, and the tropics, and you're squishing, you got the little squirrel nut zippers that today live in Canada and the squirrel nut zippers that live in Mexico, but now they're living together, but so is everybody else.
Okay, all right, wait, hang on. Point of order. What the hell is the squirrel nut zipper? I thought it was a ska band from the 90s or whatever.
Well, I'm just... You know what I'm thinking of when I say that? I'm thinking of that darn cartoon called Ice Age, and you've got that crazy whacked out squirrel who's constantly chasing after the nut. And that's just kind of, it's the band that it's not an actual animal.
Well, I let it go the first time you said it, because I thought that might be it. But now you started using it again and again, and I began to think it was a real thing. All right. Just color.
Mm-hmm. Color for you people. This is the boring part. The next one I can just say monotone. Everyone would be like, riveted. Tell me more about myself. Joking.
Yeah, that's the one that's the one people want to hear. Part 2.
Yeah, that's why you do this one first. Listen, people. I'm not selling you the steak. I'm selling you the sizzle. Well, no. Give me the steak first. Sorry. All right. Sizzle's good. Sizzle comes later. Anyway. So I'm wondering if, I don't know what happens then with these animals, but they still are able to find a way to look at this same kind of thing that this paper by Tyler Kartzenel that was published in 2015, they still are able to do that, but they look at the isotope composition of the teeth. Shit, these isotopes have cropped up a number of times. And it's a lot of the same kind of thing, like what you eat, you are what you eat kind of thing. And so from the teeth, they can look at the carbon isotope composition of the teeth and match that up with the kinds of plants that produce the varying degrees of, the carbon isotope ratios that, occur out there today. So there's a lot of present is the key to the past type stuff going on. And then of course the predators eat the prey, and so the predators then get that same kind of ratio. And so you can kind of match it up, like, okay, you can have the chain, like, okay, this is a horse and it looks like it ate grass based on its carbon isotope signature. And this, lion looks like it ate the horse because its carbon isotope ratio matches up from its teeth. And so they're able to do that. So as far as I can tell, that still seemed to happen. But what happens when everything got sandwiched is that it's like things got partitioned. So instead of having massive grasslands and massive forests like we have in North America today, you would just have like clumps of grassland with clumps of forests, and the trees would be all like, hey, you know, I'm hanging out with you this time. And it wouldn't have been the normal, like, well, we're all just evergreen forests, or, you know, we're all just, you know, elms and oaks and stuff like that together in a deciduous forest, or the jungle, and, you know, that kind of thing. Would have been a lot more sandwiched, apparently. So anyway, so that's North America. But speaking of Africa, do you have any questions before I move on to this next example, which is extremely important?
I believe you.
I saved it for last.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I saved it for
the latter of these examples. Yeah.
I saved it for the segue qualities. For you and I are both Star Trek Next Generation fans. They would always have like the "to be continued" at the end of one season, where they're like, "Oh, the damn Cardassians" or whatever, and then they begin it the next season. But we're in the Pleistocene. This is different. So, so Africa is interesting, like I said before, because pretty much like I, was saying, when you think about the Serengeti or any of the savannas in Africa, that's kind of the idea of what was going on throughout the whole entire planet. Europe, Asia, Australia, North America, South America. There were these big mammals pretty much dominating the landscape. And when I mean dominating the landscape, a bunch of elephants can just push down a whole shit ton of trees just because they want to, and because they do, and because that's what they, why not? They're bored. And then you've pretty much got no forest. So they can have a huge impact. And that's going to have an impact on how the soils develop, and it's going to have an impact on who else can come in and what their patterns of behavior are. And so it's like large mammals can have a top-down effect all the way down even to, say, what's happening in the soils. But Africa still has all of these things. Well, they're hanging on. I don't know how, everybody. So if you just like follow the news, they're like, this African rhino is gone, And then, one of the big issues with these large ones is that their rates of reproduction, like how fast they turn over a new generation, is really slow compared to a bunch of little voles and small guys. And there were some small mammals that went extinct, but the vast majority did not. And also the vast majority of animals that seem to like hide out in the deep woods seem to also not go extinct. So there's a little bit of a size and exposure and a lack of being able to turn over your population that also is a factor here. But again, we'll talk about that in part 2. So there's a lot of turnover from the Pliocene to the Pleistocene in Africa. And what's interesting about it, though, is that for a while there was this sort of overlap between, the old guard and the new guard. So Africa got an influx of, migration, just like North America did. And, and it came from, Eurasia. So lions and tigers, which I still think are, closely related, and they share a common ancestry with each other more so than they do with any other, like, big cat in their particular genera, which is Panthera. Lions came in probably from, Eurasia, because they had quite a bit of history in Eurasia as well. And then, and there's still some in India. And there was some even all the way up into Greek times, apparently, in Greece. So the thing that's happening in Africa is that you have, Africa is funny because, I don't know, you probably know this, I have no idea. But we have these sort of projections of the planet that we put on to be able to cover a globe. And so if you were to take that off and look at it, there's different kinds of ways that people create these little coordinate systems of projections of Earth and its continents and oceans and how they're related to each other. But if you were to peel that off, what often happens, the size of the pole areas looks exaggerated in its size, and the size of the equator is, well, from, Africa to South America, you can trust that relative size difference comparatively. So oftentimes Greenland looks like it's the size of Africa when really it's kind of really much smaller. I wouldn't say I wouldn't even know how to say what the size of it really is. So like you have like this warping, if you will, of how we see things when we look at maps. And so then it kind of, if you're not thinking about it, you don't realize that Africa is fucking huge and a lot is going on in Africa, and over time, a lot has happened in Africa. So it's kind of interesting from one standpoint when you talk about the faunas and floras of Africa, because there was this interesting amount of overlap that occurred for a little while, and then whatever you would say the modern faunas and floras are took over. And a lot of that probably has to do with just the furthering of the climate change as you develop these massive ice sheets and the cycles in the north. But this, I was talking to you about the what do you call it? The saber-toothed cats, the Smilodon and all that, Rancho La Brea, tar pits. There was, also Homotherium serum, which is a dirk tooth cat. So these are these dagger teeth cats or whatever, and they've got these big, amazing teeth that stick down from the upper jaw. The upper canines grow and grow and grow, and the thing about them was that they were sticking around for a little while there, and there were at least 3 in Africa throughout this early phase, if you will, of the Pleistocene. And one of the things that's often shown is like early humans being eaten by one of these kind of cats, but like in leopard style, And what these kinds of animals say with respect to their morphology is that, for one thing, when you look at the saber teeth, they're kind of fragile. They're not teeth that you would just chunk into anything anywhere, because they could break. And if they break, well, as you can imagine, they've invested quite a bit of their development and energy into growing these big ass teeth, that they must be important to them. And without them, who knows how exactly they make a living. Some people have seen some saber-toothed cats like Smilodon and have seen wounds healed. Wounds that probably would have been bad for business, but they seem to have healed, which suggests potentially that they were able to eat, even though the kind of injury does not suggest they could have caught the food themselves. So maybe there was a sociality to some of these cats, not all, but some. And so, but some of these cats are kind of, how you might break it down is you have cats that are leopard size and cats that are lion size. And the Homotherium dirk-tooth cats, it looks like were, definitely they were lion size, but they also had sort of a build like a lion. So they were kind of proportional and kind of longerish limbs, and they look like they could run like out in an open area. And one of the things that they found in Texas is a whole bunch of Homotherium fossils that seems to suggest that there might have been some kind of social living situation, and with them a ton of baby mammoth fossils. And so it looks like these Homotherium populations in this area of Texas, for instance, were social, and they hunted little baby mammoths, and that was how they made a living on the open plain or whatever of Texas during, the past in the Pleistocene. And so maybe something like that was also happening for Homotherium in Africa. And so you also have this introduction, though, of both lions and leopards. And of course, you also have hyenas running around as the caniforms. And no bears, really. There's maybe one bear, but it's inconsequential, and it's not in the Pleistocene. But what the leopard-sized ones suggest is that, well, what they require based on their morphology is they weren't like long distance runners. The limb length, everything seems to suggest short sprint, ambush style, get the animal, use your huge, thick, strong limbs to hold the thing down, and then with your teeth just gouge it and, some soft spot and just let it bleed to death. And this kind of makes sense. This sort of strategy does work, but you need cover. So what it suggests is that even though we have this idea of in the Pleistocene that everything opened up and we had this big open plains, it suggests that it probably wasn't exactly that way yet, like it can be today. And that allowed these saber-tooth, dirk-tooth type cats to make a living in Africa still. But that eventually they do go extinct around, 1.5 million or whatever it is. And then the Homo therium a little bit later than that. And the thinking is that things really did start to open up even more around that time. And it is kind of prior to this mid-Pleistocene transition, so I don't know exactly what's going on, but one of the things I've learned about researching the climate of Africa is that what happens in one part of Africa is not necessarily going to be echoed or whatever in another part. Sometimes, like Africa as a climate, the climate of Africa, or climates, I guess, seem to have minds of their own, kind of like, the way the sort of distributed nervous system of a octopus, like its arms can be like looking at something, even though people who observe octopus in the oceans note that the octopus, like based on its eyes and the kind of central part, seems to like be asleep. And like in one tentacle is like, what's this over here? Like they seem to have their own autonomy to a degree. And I kind of think that's sort of how I've been able to gather my understanding of climate and climate change, whether it's long-term or short-term in Africa, seems to be just kind of all over the place. Every once in a while, it's like in unison, everything happens together. But this might have been one of those things where it just couldn't be held back, and boom, you just have this huge change. And the organisms that we have, or the mammals and the plants and the arrangements that we have today, were the ones that were able to make the right adjustments, or were already well adapted to that type of environment anyway, and it just tipped in their favor, and then they inherited, Africa. And in so many words, so did we. And so that's kind of another part that we'll talk about next time, when we're talking about, I guess, biology's next big leap is kind of how I would word it. Or you could call it the exciting part. But there's like it's a bit of an oncoming harvest that is going on, and culling, if you will. It's kind of a weird time in a way, because we just make things strange all of a sudden. And I think it'll be fun to talk about because it's confusing as fuck.
Yeah, those are usually fun.
Well, I mean, just to give you a taste, it's like I don't know if any one paleoanthropologist agrees with another one. Like it's so, like it's the most volatile science I have encountered. Like it just shit changes so fast. I have a hypothesis as to why that might be the case, but it's just like, damn, like you can't like get comfortable with one thing about our past in terms of the paleontology of it. Like it's so like, okay, and we keep coming up with, more excavations and spelunking, cave dives and more stuff that we learn. It just doesn't, whatever. It's almost like we should, like, one of the rare times where I'd say, let's not speculate for like another 100 years, like let's just collect the information and then just deal with it later. And you and I won't be alive, but damn, it's like, it's so tempting, I think, for a lot of people to just jump to some kind of interesting, fun way of telling the story. But Africa itself, like I just described, its climate seeming like some kind of distributed nervous system of an octopus, it doesn't like, it's hard to say, oh yes, and then. Anyway, those are the sort of the few changes. There are lots of different kinds of organisms. Of course, you have the development of giraffes. The big African elephants that we have today, Loxodonta is the genera. There's two. There's one that's a forest one, and then there's the big open plains one. They're actually recent inheritors. Well, the Loxodonta in the plains is a recent inheritor of the Serengeti. It's kind of like a newcomer. There was one throughout much of the Pleistocene, and I think it's just the same genera as the Asian elephant. Elephas is the genera. That one just dominated forever in the open, so I in the open environments or whatever. So I don't know what it was that caused them to go extinct. It's bizarre because a lot of the things that people talk about as to why a lot of these organisms don't go extinct is because of exposure to humans and humans to them, and so it was just, it's like growing up with your pets, it's nothing weird, it's just, oh yeah, it's just a dog, or whatever. So there isn't that same bloodlust, or easy pickings even, they know your behaviors and habits, and they're like, yeah, we've been evolving next to you for quite a while. We know what you as soon as we start seeing the flint and you start making some fire, we're out, or I don't know, it's just like, they're just wary of humans or something, but,
It's wise.
Yep. But that's, yeah, I don't know if this went well or if I have no idea, but I will say that, the Pleistocene, when fucking Steven Pinker goes, oh, back in the Pleistocene, or somebody, that's when humans, this is what they're talking about, and they probably don't know jack shit about it. They just know to say the Pleistocene because they read it somewhere. But I think it is an important period. Paleoanthropologists will know everything about this, I'm pretty sure, just because it's their job. And they're usually out there like paleontologists. That's basically what they are. They're just paleontologists focused on human remains rather than something else. Somebody else could focus on giraffes, or whatever. But, it's humans, so it gets a press ticket.
Yeah. So you've reached the end of part 1?
I have.
Is that what you were saying? Okay.
Data jump over for this part. Yeah. I mean, there's so many little things. I didn't know how to thread them together, like the coevolution and stuff like that. But
well, that's cool. There's a whole another part.
Well,
though it's going to swing a bit more toward the humans, I guess, or the proto-humans.
All of it. It's going to swing all the way. And this one, I hope, will be a little more challenging and provide you a little more space to be like, wait a minute, or whatever, because especially I think when it comes to the hominina, our particular lineage, man, it's just weird. And then we can talk about the mass extinctions, and we'll talk about the Holocene a little bit and the Anthropocene. Then we'll shed a tear.
We'll find the end of the world then pretty soon. Or the end of humanity, life, as we know it.
If we would be so lucky. Probably not. It's just going to keep going. Sorry. But yeah, I mean...
Well, I look forward to it.
Well, you're not looking backwards to... No, absolutely. We'll do it
Look forward to looking back with you again next time.
Yeah, that's right. Back or to the future, past. Something.